sun was setting over the wide plains, its golden light falling across the wooden cabin where Daniel lived. He had spent months alone on this frontier world, a quiet farming planet far from Earth's cities. The fields stretched for miles. The air was heavy with dust and silence hung thick in the evening sky. But Daniel had grown tired of solitude. He missed voices, meals shared, laughter, even arguments. So he had nailed a small wooden sign outside his fence. Its message simple: cook wanted, position to fill. He never expected anyone to come so quickly. Most travelers avoided this place, and the few settlers nearby had families of their own. So when the wooden gate creaked open and a tall figure stepped through, Daniel almost thought it was a trick of the light. The sunset burned behind her, making her shape glow like something not entirely human. And then he saw her clearly: silver hair that shimmered, skin pale as moonlight, eyes that glowed faintly even in the dusk. She held something tight against her chest, wrapped in cloth. It was a baby, its small face hidden, its breathing soft. Daniel froze, his hand still resting on the old sign. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice sharp with caution. The woman looked at him steadily, her voice low and melodic. "You asked for a cook, I can cook." Daniel's stomach tightened. She wasn't from Earth, that much was clear. Her features were too strange, her presence too otherworldly. Yet she stood calm, not pleading, not begging, only holding her child as if the world around her did not matter. "This isn't a place for strangers," Daniel said, his eyes narrowing. The woman tilted her head slightly. "I am no stranger to hunger," she whispered. "I only need a chance." The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a faint cry, and Daniel felt something shift inside him. He hadn't heard a child's cry in years, not since the colony wars had left the settlement broken and half abandoned. The sound felt both foreign and deeply human. Still, his guard stayed up. "Why here?" he pressed. "Why my farm?" Her gaze flicked toward the horizon where the last edge of sunlight burned. "Because others will not take me," she said simply. "They fear what I am." Daniel's breath caught. Her honesty unsettled him more than lies would have. "Are you running from someone?" he asked. The woman didn't answer right away. She only adjusted the baby's blanket, her long silver hair falling like a curtain around the child. Finally she whispered, "I am running from hunger, from cold, from silence, the same things you run from." The man studied her, torn between suspicion and curiosity. Her words struck deeper than he wanted to admit. He had thought himself strong for surviving alone, yet here was a mother braving the unknown with a baby in her arms. He could almost feel the weight of her journey in the way she stood, tired yet unbending. Still, he could not let his guard drop so easily. "You're kind," he began slowly. "They don't usually come here." Her eyes glimmered in the fading light. "And humans don't usually open their doors to us," she replied. "But maybe you are different." The silence stretched long between them, broken only by the soft whimper of the baby and the distant call of nightbirds. Daniel's mind raced. If he let her stay, others might notice and questions would follow. If he turned her away, she might not survive the night, not with a baby, not in the barren fields beyond. For the first time in months, he felt the weight of choice pressing down on him. The job ad had been a simple thing, an attempt to break his loneliness. But the figure before him was no ordinary cook, no ordinary woman. She was something far stranger, and far more dangerous. Yet as the baby's small hand slipped free of the blanket and reached into the cool night air, Daniel felt his defenses waver. This was no invader, no threat, not yet. This was a mother, standing with quiet strength in the fading light, and whether he liked it or not, his farm would never be the same again. Daniel did not sleep that night. He sat by the wooden table in his small cabin, the lamp flickering softly, while the alien woman placed the baby gently on a folded blanket near the fire. Her movements were careful, practiced, as if every sound in the room mattered. Daniel's hand stayed close to the old rifle leaning against the wall, though he never lifted it. His eyes followed her silently, measuring every step, every gesture. The woman turned her face toward him, the firelight catching her silver hair. "You do not trust me," she said calmly, not as a question, but as a truth. Daniel gave a short laugh, bitter and tired. "Trust doesn't come easy on this planet." Her lips curved into something like a smile, though her eyes carried shadows. "On my world, trust died long ago," she whispered. "That is why I am here." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You still haven't told me your name," he said. For a moment she was silent, as if the question was heavier than it should have been. Finally, she replied softly, "Lyra." The name rolled gently in the air, alien yet simple. Daniel repeated it in his mind, testing how it felt. "Lyra," he muttered. "And the child?" Her gaze softened as she looked at the baby. "His name is Kale." The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence that followed. Daniel studied her, the way her hands trembled slightly when she touched the child, the way her shoulders seemed, always ready to bear more weight than they should. He wanted to ask more. Where she came from, why she carried a child across a dangerous world, who hunted her, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he asked the simplest question. "Can you cook?" Lyra turned toward the small kitchen corner where pots hung unused and dust lay thick. Her silver eyes scanned the shelves, and then she nodded. "Yes," she said, "I can cook." She moved with surprising confidence, gathering what little food Daniel had stored, dried grain, a few roots, a small pouch of herbs. Her hands worked with quiet speed, crushing, stirring, blending. The smell of spices began to rise in the air, filling the cabin with warmth Daniel had almost forgotten existed. He watched her in silence, torn between suspicion and something else. Something he didn't want to name. The baby stirred and whimpered softly, and Lyra hummed a strange melody while stirring the pot, a song that sounded both ancient and unfamiliar. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise. The song was not human, yet it carried sorrow, longing, and a strange comfort. For a moment, the cabin no longer felt empty. When she finally placed the food on the table, Daniel hesitated. The steam rose in soft curls, carrying a scent that tugged at memories of home, of family dinners long gone. Lyra sat across from him, waiting, not touching her own bowl until he moved first. Daniel picked up the spoon slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He took a bite. The flavor surprised him, rich, warm, layered with spices he had never tasted. It felt like life had returned to the room. For the first time in months, maybe years, he ate without bitterness. But trust is a fragile thing. When Daniel set the spoon down, his voice was firm. "Why are you really here, Lyra?" Her eyes flicked toward the baby, then back at him. "Because nowhere else will take us," she said. "Because men with guns are searching, and if they find me, Kale will not live." Daniel's stomach tightened. So his suspicions had been right. Someone was after her. "Who?" he asked sharply. Her voice grew quiet. "Hunters." The word lingered in the air like smoke. "They do not forgive mothers like me. They do not forgive children like him." Daniel's hand drifted unconsciously toward the rifle, not to lift it, but to feel its weight. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, carrying whispers through the cracks of the wooden walls. For the first time, Daniel felt his small cabin shrink. The walls no longer protected him. They trapped him. If hunters were truly searching, they would not stop. Lyra reached across the table, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed fear. "You posted a sign because you wanted someone to cook," she said. "But maybe what you really needed was someone to remind you you're not alone." Daniel's chest tightened, his mind warring with itself. She was dangerous, yes, but she was also right. The baby let out a soft cry, breaking the silence. Daniel looked at the child, then back at the woman. For the first time, he felt the weight of choice not as a burden but as a path he had not walked in years. He pushed the bowl away and leaned back slowly. "Tomorrow," he said. Tomorrow you start working here, but if trouble comes—" He let the words trail off unfinished, but Lyra understood. Her silver eyes met his, unblinking. "Trouble always comes," she whispered, "but so does courage." And as the fire dimmed and the night deepened, Daniel realized something. His lonely farm was no longer just his. It had become a place where fate itself had walked in, carrying a child, and waiting to test his humanity. The morning came cold and silent. Mist clung to the ground around Daniel's cabin, soft and silver, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Daniel stepped outside, boots crunching on the dry soil, his eyes scanning the endless fields. Something felt wrong, not in sight but in the air. The silence was too heavy, too unnatural. Inside the cabin, Lyra rocked Kale gently, humming the same haunting melody Daniel had heard the night before. It floated through the wooden walls, strange and beautiful. But Daniel's mind was elsewhere. His eyes caught faint marks in the dirt near the fence. Boot prints not his, too large to belong to Lyra, too many to belong to a single traveler. He crouched low, brushing the soil with his fingers, his chest tightening. Someone had been here, watching, when he stepped. Back inside, his face was grim. "You weren't lying," he muttered. "Someone is looking for you." Lyra's silver eyes lifted from her child, calm yet heavy with fear. "They are never far," she whispered. "Hunters travel in silence, but their shadow spreads wide." Daniel felt anger rising, though he didn't know if it was anger, at her for bringing danger, or at the world for forcing him to choose. "You should have kept going," he snapped. "You should have walked past my farm." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled against the child's blanket. "And if I had, Kale would be dead by now," she answered. "Would you prefer that?" The question cut deeper than he wanted to admit. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. The truth was cruel. He could not push her out, not now, not after last night. Yet every choice he made would now carry weight heavier than his lonely life had ever known. Lyra stood slowly, her gown catching the weak morning light. "I can leave if you wish," she said. "But understand this. If I walk into the fields with my child, you will hear the gunfire before the day is done." Daniel's fists clenched. His chest burning, he turned away, staring at the wooden walls as if they could give him answers. Finally he spoke, his voice low. "Stay, but stay quiet. No one must see you. No one must know." The day passed heavy with tension. Daniel worked the fields with his mind far from the soil. Every sound, every bird call, every crack of wind, felt like a warning. When the sun began to set, he saw it. A glimmer on the horizon, metallic. Moving slowly across the plains, binoculars revealed the truth. An armored vehicle, far away but not far enough. He went back inside quickly. Lyra read his expression without needing words. "They are searching," she said, clutching Kale. Close, Daniel nodded, his jaw tight. "If they come here, they'll ask questions," he muttered. "And I can't lie well." Her eyes softened, but her voice was sharp. "Then tell them nothing. Silence can be stronger than lies." The baby whimpered, and Daniel's heart thudded. He had survived. Years alone, but this was different. This was not survival of crops or water. It was survival against men who would not hesitate to kill. He had not asked for this, yet it had come to his door. That night, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The fire flickered weakly, casting shadows that seemed to crawl on the walls. Daniel sat by the window, rifle across his knees, watching the distant glow of headlights crawl slowly across the horizon. Lyra sat on the floor with Kyle, her body curled protectively around him, humming that same song. Daniel hated how it made his chest ache, how it reminded him of things he had buried, family, love, trust, all torn away long ago. At midnight the sound came, engines, faint but steady, rolling across the plains. Daniel's breath caught as lights swept across the fields, crawling closer. He turned to Lyra, his voice urgent. "Downstairs, the cellar. Go now." Her eyes widened, but she obeyed. Clutching Kale and moving quickly, Daniel pulled a loose wooden panel near the floor, revealing the old storm cellar beneath. Stay there. Don't make a sound, he whispered. She hesitated, her silver eyes locking onto his. You could turn me in, she said softly. Save yourself. Daniel's hand tightened on the panel, his voice harsh. Just go. The last thing he saw before closing the hatch was her eyes, filled with both fear and trust, a strange mix that unsettled him more than the approaching soldiers. Moments later, a knock rattled the cabin door. Daniel's hand hovered over the rifle, his heart hammering. The knock came again, louder, firmer, followed by a voice. Open. Up, frontier man, routine check. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. This was no routine check. This was the beginning of something that could not be undone. The knock thundered again, echoing through the small wooden cabin. Daniel's chest felt tight, his hand frozen above the old rifle resting against the wall. The fire in the hearth crackled weakly, but its warmth did nothing to ease the chill crawling down his spine. He took a deep breath, then forced his legs to move, each step toward the door heavier than the last. When he opened it, the night air rushed in, carrying dust and the sharp smell of oil. 3 men stood outside, armored vests glinting under the pale moonlight, their helmets shadowing their faces. Behind them, a small armored transport hummed softly, its headlights throwing long, cruel beams across the plains. Evening, farmer, one of the men said, his voice flat. Official. We're conducting a search. Reports of unusual travelers in this sector. Daniel gripped the doorframe, forcing his voice steady. Travelers don't come out this far, he muttered. Nothing here but dirt and silence. The soldier's eyes narrowed, his gaze drifting past Daniel into the dim cabin. That's what they all say, he replied. But orders are orders. May we come in? Daniel hesitated, his throat dry. If he refused, suspicion would burn brighter. If he agreed, they would step inside, and the cellar below his feet suddenly felt like a shallow grave. His hand twitched toward the rifle, but he knew 3 armed. Men were more than he could handle. So he stepped aside, his jaw tight. Nothing to hide, he muttered, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The soldiers entered, boots heavy on the wooden floor. Their flashlights cut across the room, landing on the table, the fire, the half-empty bowls from dinner. One of them sniffed the air. Smells good in here, he said, smirking. What did you cook, farmer? Daniel forced a shrug. Stew, just stew. But inside, his stomach twisted. The scent still hung thick in the air. The spices Lyra had used, strange, foreign, unlike anything grown on this soil. Another soldier stepped near the window, his light sweeping over the walls, the shelves, the rifle leaning in the corner. You live here alone? He asked, his tone sharp. Daniel nodded quickly. Been alone a long time. The soldier's light lingered on the bowls, his brow furrowing. Strange. Looks like 2 plates, maybe more. Daniel's chest tightened, but he forced out a rough laugh. Cooked too much, figured I'd save some for tomorrow. For a moment, silence hung heavy, the only sound the baby's faint whimper below the floor. Muffled but real. Daniel's blood ran cold, his mind screaming. He coughed loudly, slamming his boot against the floor to cover the sound. The soldiers glanced at him, suspicious. You all right, farmer? One asked. Dust? Daniel muttered, his voice rough. Gets in your throat out here. The leader's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp as a blade. You sure you haven't seen anyone? No strangers passing through? No women carrying a child? Daniel's jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Every instinct told him to confess, to push the danger away from himself. But another instinct, older, deeper, kept his lips sealed. He shook his head. No one, he said firmly. No one comes here. The leader studied him for a long moment, then turned to the others. Check outside, perimeter sweep, he ordered. 2 soldiers stepped out, their boots crunching against the soil as they disappeared into the mist. Daniel's legs felt weak, his hands trembling. The leader lingered, his gaze sweeping the cabin once more. Funny thing about secrets, he muttered. They always leak one way or another. He stepped out at last, leaving Daniel alone in the dim cabin. the firelight flickering against his pale face. But relief never came. Outside, the sound of boots echoed, closer to the hidden cellar doors at the side of the cabin. Daniel's breath hitched, sweat breaking across his brow. If they looked too closely, if they moved even one plank of wood, everything would end. He moved quickly, grabbing a lantern and stepping outside, forcing his voice loud and steady. "Careful out there, fields are full of holes. Break an ankle easy." The soldiers glanced at him, annoyed but distracted. One muttered something under his breath and turned back toward the transport. Minutes crawled like hours, but finally the search ended. The leader climbed back into the transport, his voice carrying across the night. "Nothing here, move on." Engines roared. Headlights swept across the plains, and the vehicle rumbled away, disappearing into the mist. Daniel stood frozen, lantern shaking in his hand until the sound faded into silence. Only then did he return inside, closing the door softly. He knelt by the hidden panel and lifted it. Lyra's silver eyes looked up at him from the darkness below. Kale pressed tightly. Against her chest she whispered, "You risked your life." Daniel exhaled, his voice low, raw. "No, I risked my silence." For the first time he realized something terrifying and undeniable. He was no longer just a farmer on a lonely world. He was part of something larger, something dangerous. And the moment he had opened his door to her, his fate had already been rewritten. The morning after the soldiers left was heavy with silence. Daniel walked the fields with tired eyes, but his hands would not steady. His mind still replaying every knock, every question, every second the baby almost gave them away. Lyra stayed, inside, rocking Kale, her silver eyes always watching the door as if the shadow of the soldiers lingered there. Daniel tried to tell himself the danger had passed, but deep down he knew the truth. Danger never leaves. It only waits. By afternoon he saw it. Smoke rising from the horizon, black and cruel against the pale sky. His chest tightened, his boots sinking in the soil as he stared. The settlement in the distance, small, poor, filled with farmers like him, was burning. He could see tiny flashes like sparks, but he knew what they were. Gunfire. He ran back to the cabin, bursting through the door. "Pack what you can," he barked, his voice sharper than he meant. "They're not just searching, they're burning everything." Lyra's face tightened, her hands clutching the child closer. "Hunters," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They have found new prey." Daniel grabbed his old pack, stuffing what little food remained, his rifle slung across his shoulder. "We can't stay here, they'll sweep this way," he said, his voice low but urgent. Lyra shook her head, her hair glowing in the dim light. "You don't understand, Daniel. They are not just searching. For me, they destroy what they cannot control. They will burn your fields too." The words cut deeper than he wanted. Everything he had built, every lonely year of work, all about to turn to ash. He cursed under his breath, slamming the door shut as if wood could hold back fire and steel. Outside, the wind carried faint screams, drifting across the fields like broken echoes. Daniel paced the floor, torn between fury and fear. Lyra laid Kale gently on the blanket, then stood, her posture straighter than he had seen before. Her silver eyes locked onto his, glowing faintly in the gloom. "You still think I am only a burden," she said softly. "But you have not seen what I can do." Daniel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Lyra moved to the window, her hand resting on the wooden frame. "When my kind is hunted, we do not survive by running alone," she whispered. "We carry something within us, a power they fear, a power that burns brighter when we protect our children." Before Daniel could answer, a sound split the air. Engines, closer, louder, followed by the sharp crack of weapons. A transport rolled into view across the fields, soldiers spilling from its side, rifles gleaming in the sun. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle, his throat dry. "They're here," he muttered. The cabin shook as boots thundered across the soil. Shouts rang out, harsh and commanding. "Search the house, burn it if you must," one voice barked. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs, his mind screaming to run, but his legs held him rooted to the floor. Lyra stepped forward, her face calm but her eyes burning. Stay behind. Me, she whispered. No matter what you see. Daniel almost laughed at the madness of it. She was unarmed, fragile, carrying a child. Yet something in her voice froze him. The door burst open, soldiers rushing in, rifles raised, shouting, for Daniel to move, but before he could answer, the air itself seemed to change. Lyra raised her hand and the world glowed. A pulse of light spread from her skin, soft at first, then burning brighter. The soldiers staggered, their rifles shaking, eyes wide with sudden fear. Daniel stumbled, back shielding his face from the glow. The baby in Lyra's arms did not cry, did not fear, as if he knew this power. One soldier fired, the shot tearing through the wooden wall, but the bullet never touched her. It slowed as if caught in invisible water, before falling harmlessly to the floor. Lyra's voice rose, not a scream, not a cry, but a command in a language Daniel could not understand. The soldiers stumbled back, fear breaking their formation. Daniel's breath caught, his rifle hanging limp at his side. He had seen war, seen machines tear through men, but he had never seen this. One mother, standing unarmed, turning soldiers into shadows. The cabin walls glowed with strange symbols, light crawling like veins across the wood. The hunters cursed, retreating step by step, until the pulse of light pushed them out into the fields. Then silence. Lyra lowered her hand, the glow fading. Her shoulders shaking with exhaustion, Cale stirred in her arms and she kissed his forehead gently, whispering in that alien tongue. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding, his mind racing. What was that? He stammered. Lyra's silver eyes lifted to meet his, weary but unbroken. That, she whispered, is why they will never stop chasing me. Outside, the fields smoked. Soldiers scattered into the distance, regrouping. Daniel knew this was only the beginning. His farm was no longer a hiding place, it was now a battlefield. And he, a lonely farmer who had once only wanted a cook, was now standing at the side of an alien mother who could bend light itself. The cabin still smelled of smoke and burned wood. Daniel sat against the wall, rifle across his knees, staring at the marks left by Lyra's power, faint glowing lines that slowly faded into the grain. The soldiers had fled, but he knew they would return, stronger, with more weapons. His farm, his fields, his home, everything he had built was no longer his. It had become a beacon, and hunters always returned to the flame. Lyra leaned against the table, her face pale with exhaustion, her arms wrapped around Cale. She looked weaker now, yet her silver eyes still burned with quiet fire. Daniel studied her, torn between awe and fear. You should have told me, he muttered, his voice low. What you could do. She shook her head, her hair falling like a curtain of moonlight. If I told you, would you have let me stay? She asked softly. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again, no answer coming. The truth stung too sharply. Outside, the night wind howled, carrying the scent of smoke from the burning settlement. Daniel rose to his feet, his jaw tight. We can't stay, he said firmly. By morning they'll come back with more, and this time they won't run. Lyra's arms tightened around her child, her voice quiet but steady. Then we leave. Together. The words struck Daniel like a blade. He had lived alone for so long. Every path he had walked was his alone, but now his fate was tied to hers, whether he wanted it or not. And the strange part, the part he refused to admit, was that a piece of him no longer wanted to be alone. They packed in silence. Daniel filled a worn satchel with dried food, water, and tools. Lyra carried nothing but her child, and yet it seemed as if she carried a whole world. Before dawn, they stepped into the cold night, the stars sharp above them, the ground dark beneath their boots. Daniel looked back once at the cabin, its windows glowing faintly with the last embers of fire. It no longer looked like home, only like ashes waiting to be scattered. They walked, for hours, the horizon endless, the silence heavy. Cale whimpered softly now and then, and Lyra hushed him with her strange melody. a song that made the stars themselves seem to listen. Daniel's chest ached with every note, though he could not explain why. Finally he spoke, his voice rough. "Where are we even going?" Lyra glanced at him, her silver eyes calm but unreadable. "Somewhere they cannot follow," she said. "If such a place still exists." Her words felt like a knife twisting in the dark. Daniel muttered, "There's no place they won't go. Not if they think you're dangerous." Lyra's lips curved into a bitter smile. "They don't fear me, Daniel. They fear what Kyle might become." The thought froze him mid-step. He looked at the baby, small and quiet in her arms, and for the first time he saw not just innocence but the shadow of something greater, something the hunters would kill to stop, something they might kill entire settlements to erase. "Why him?" Daniel asked, his throat dry. Lyra's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, her voice soft and distant. "Because he is not fully mine," she whispered. "His father was human." Daniel's heart stumbled, his breath catching. The world tilted. For a moment her words heavier than any gunfire. He stared at her, but she did not look back. She only walked forward, the child held close, her hair shimmering under starlight. The silence that followed was thicker than mist. Daniel's mind raced with questions, doubts, fears, but none left his lips. All he could do was walk beside her, his rifle heavy in his hands. His thoughts, heavier still by dawn. They reached the edge of a canyon, its jagged cliffs cutting across the land like a wound. Daniel stopped, scanning the ridges. "We'll rest here, but only for a moment," he said. Lyra nodded, sinking to the ground, her body trembling with fatigue. Kale slept in her arms, peaceful despite the storm closing around them. Daniel sat, his rifle across his lap, watching the horizon carefully. And then he saw it, dust rising in the distance, too fast, too sharp. Engines again coming straight toward them, his jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around the rifle. "They've found us," he muttered. Lyra lifted her head, her eyes tired but burning with resolve. "Then we run no longer," she said quietly. "If they want to take my child, they will walk through fire." Daniel stared at her, at the woman who had once knocked on his door with nothing but hunger and hope. Now she looked like something far greater, like a storm ready to break. And deep inside, Daniel felt something awaken too. For years he had lived for nothing but survival. But now, for the first time in years, he had something worth fighting for. The engines roared closer, the dust cloud rising higher. Daniel rose to his feet, his rifle ready, his heart steady. Lyra stood beside him, Kyle held close, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the new dawn. The hunters would come. Yes. But this time, the farmer and the alien mother would face them together. The engines roared closer, echoing through the canyon. Walls, dust clouds rose high, blotting out the morning sun. Daniel stood at the edge of the cliff, rifle steady, heart pounding not from fear but from resolve. Beside him, Lyra held Kale tight, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the new light, her hair whipping in the wind like strands of fire. For the first time, the farmer and the alien mother stood not as strangers, but as something more. Two lives bound by fate. The hunters arrived, in-force armored transports grinding to a halt, soldiers spilling out in rows of steel and rifles. Their commander, tall and cold, stepped forward, his helmet reflecting the rising sun. "Hand over the woman and the child," his voice boomed. "Do so and we spare you, farmer." Daniel's jaw tightened, his grip on the rifle unshaking. He spat in the dirt, his voice hard as stone. "You'll get nothing from me." The soldiers raised their rifles, tension sharp in the air, but Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between the guns and Daniel. Her voice rang out, strong and unyielding. "You fear what you do not understand. You destroy what you cannot control, but my child is not your weapon, not your curse." The commander laughed, cold and cruel. "He is a threat to everything, and so are you." Then the first shot rang. The canyon exploded into chaos, bullets screaming through the air, dust flying, rocks shattering. Daniel fired, back each shot fueled not by survival but by something fiercer. Protection, loyalty, defiance. He dropped one soldier, then another, his body moving with a strength he thought long buried. But still they kept coming, endless waves of steel and fire. Lyra's power surged again, her body glowing with light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Symbols of her people burned across the canyon walls, ancient and alive. The soldiers faltered. As the glow blinded them, their weapons trembling in their hands, one tried to push through, but his rifle melted in his grip, the metal warping like wax in flame. Lyra's voice rose, not in fear, but in fury, a language older than stars. The canyon shook, the air vibrating with her strength. Daniel watched in awe even as he fought. She was no longer just a mother. She was a storm. And yet, at the heart of that storm, she clutched Cale close, never letting him go. Even with fire blazing around her, she was still simply a mother protecting her child. The commander stepped forward, unfazed, his own weapon humming with strange energy. "You think light will save you?" he snarled. "You are only one, and we are many." But before he could fire, Daniel raised his rifle. The shot cracked. The commander staggered back, his weapon falling to the ground. Daniel's voice roared across the canyon. "She's not alone anymore." The hunters hesitated, their leader wounded, their lines breaking. Lyra lifted her free hand high and the light burst outward, a wave of brilliance that swept across the canyon. Soldiers cried out, blinded, stumbling, dropping their weapons as the ground itself seemed to burn beneath them. And then silence, broken only by the soft cry of Cale, waking in his mother's arms. The hunters fled, dragging their wounded, their transports rumbling back into the dust. The canyon grew quiet again, the wind carrying only the fading echo of retreat. Daniel lowered his rifle, his arms trembling, his chest heaving. He turned to Lyra, her face pale but still burning. With strength, "You saved us," he whispered. Her eyes met his, weary but full of fire. "No," she said softly. "We saved each other." Daniel looked at Cale, small and fragile, yet carrying the weight of two worlds. He realized then that the child was more than just a reason for fear. He was a reason for hope. Not a weapon, not a curse, but a bridge between what was human and what was alien. The sun rose higher, its light washing over the canyon, turning the dust to gold. Daniel stood with Lyra at his side, Cale between them. His farm was gone, his old life burned. But something new had begun, something stronger than loneliness, stronger than fear. For the first time in years, Daniel felt alive. They walked from the canyon together, three shadows stretching long against the light. Behind them lay ashes, ahead of them uncertainty. But Daniel no longer cared, because he was not walking alone anymore. And neither was she.